Oh, you want answers? We've got your answers, or at least some good guesses. Tonight, we officially are going to turn the page to 2025. We're going to get into everything from the UGA final rankings in the AP poll that came out just a few days ago. We're going to take a look at a few impact freshmen for the Georgia Bulldogs here in 2025. And we're also going to go ahead and really try to peek around the corner and take a look at, I don't know, some early schedule observations, as well as a way too early top 5 for the 2025 college football season. All that and much more on this edition of the How About That Dogscast. Now, I got to tell you, when you start looking ahead into 2025, you can just get lost because there's a bunch of winding roads out there in front of you. But we have to start where we finished. If we're going to leave 2024 in the background, we have to just see what everybody else says about our Georgia Bulldogs here in 2025. All the CFP games are done and out of the way. We all know that Ohio State dog walked Notre Dame at the national championship, just like I said they would. And it's one of those things where Georgia could have been there. They could have beaten Notre Dame. I believe they would have beaten Penn State had they executed the way they were supposed to, but they didn't. You have to go win your games, and the Dogs didn't do that, and so they're not sitting there in the top 5. Nope. The way it shook out was Ohio State, Notre Dame, then Oregon, Texas, who the Dogs beat twice, sitting at number 4, Penn State at number 5, and then you have the Dogs at number 6. Yet another top 10 finish for Kirby Smart and his Georgia Bulldogs. And the thing about that is it's a great season. The Dogs were SEC champions, a top 10 finish in the final rankings. But we all know that Kirby Smart is a victim of his own success, and that the Georgia Bulldog fan base, especially those that have come on board since, around 2021, they are only used to top 5 or better finishes for the Dogs. But it is what it is. You see how it shook out. The Dogs didn't take care of business on the field for whatever reason, a myriad of reasons that maybe they didn't achieve all that we as fans thought they could. But it's time to move on to 2025. Now, Kirby's already there. The team, they're already there. They're lifting weights, doing early morning runs, doing all the things that you have to do to get ready to tackle the schedule that lays in front of them. So the first thing we're going to do, looking ahead to 2025, is not necessarily make predictions on these games because it's way too early, but we can look at them and sort of get a feel for what the season might look like for Georgia in 2025. So I'm going to talk about this in terms of maybe a few early observations. So we're just going to walk through the entire schedule. And the one thing about this schedule, it is not as difficult as the 2024 schedule was. If for no other reason, then you don't open with a team that a lot of people think might contend for the college football playoff like they did in 2024. This year, they're going to open with Marshall. Now, Marshall, good team, right? Good program over the years. Jim Donnan, former Georgia Bulldogs head coach, he was the head coach at Marshall prior to coming to Athens. So I like the Marshall Thundering Herd. They're a lot of fun, but that should be the kind of game that Georgia needs to open the season here in 2025. Because as we talked about in previous episodes, there are new faces all over the field for Georgia in 2025. They're going to be green, they're going to be young, and they're going to have to figure some things out. Of course, everybody knows they're going to have to name a new starting quarterback in Athens. That's where everything starts. But there's so much more that they have to dig into here. They have to figure out the new front seven because there's going to be so many new faces along the defensive line. They have to figure out who's going to be the leader on the back end now that Malachi Starks is gone. They're going to have to figure out who are the playmakers on this team. Where is the explosion going to come from? Are they actually going to turn loose all these playmakers that they go out and work so hard to recruit, right? So we can look at Marshall, feel pretty good about opening the season against a quality program. Should be a good game for Georgia, but it's a game that Georgia should win. Let's be honest here. So, again, we're not doing a prediction on the record here, but you got to think Georgia gets the W to open the season. Then they're going to welcome in Austin Peay for the second home game of the year. And that, of course, should be a win for Georgia. And right here, they should still be trying to figure things out. They should still be settling into their groove. They should still figure out or be working on figuring out exactly what their identity is going to be on offense in particular, as I talked about a couple of weeks ago. That's one of the things that Kirby really has to work on here in 2025. They have to figure out and understand. I get that you have to be balanced. Every team wants to be balanced, run, pass. You want to be able to run it when you want to. You want to be able to throw it when you want to. And you want to be able to do either when you have to, right? You want to be a balanced football team. That goes without saying. But the thing about this schedule is that it's easier in that all those tough road games that were out there last year, now they're home games. So as Georgia looks down the schedule, they need to use this early part of that schedule before they go on the road because it gets stout pretty quick in September. They need to use those first couple of games to figure out that identity. They need to make sure they have a good bead on what it is and who it is that they want to be in 2025. Again, there are going to be new faces on defense, but it's going to be the same essential Kirby Smart, Glenn Schumann defense that they've been running. So it's not so much that they're trying to reinvent the wheel over there, but on offense, given what we saw in 2024, whether it was due to injuries, play calling, whatever, they have to figure out who they want to be in 2025. And these first two games should give them a quality opponent to go out there and figure that out against. Quality opponent in that they're going to show up. They have pride. They're going to play well. They are good programs, especially Marshall. And they want to go out, get a win, learn some stuff in those first couple of weeks. Then we step up the level in competition pretty quick. I mean, it is the SEC after all, and the Dogs go on the road to play Tennessee in the third week of the season. Now, we're used to this game happening much later in the year. We're used to it coming with the stakes being much, much higher. But when you think about it as the opener to the SEC season, it's not like this game is going to lose any luster in terms of what it's going to look like. And I don't have the numbers right in front of me here, but over the last few years, the last 6 or 7 years, the winning streak that the Dogs are on against Tennessee, they've outscored Tennessee something like 150-something to 30-something, right? It's crazy. They've owned the Volunteers in recent memory. And Tennessee is going to be the best version of a Josh Heupel Tennessee Vols team that we've seen yet. So the Dogs have to go on the road. This will be a challenge, especially, you have to start to think here, this is going to be whoever the starting quarterback is. This is going to be their first start on the road inside the conference. So this is going to be something that the Dogs are going to have to work through. That defense, if we know anything about Tennessee, they fancy themselves to be a high-powered offense. So that young defense is going to have to grow up in this game on the road. The things that are supposed to travel when you play the game of football are defense and run game. Looking at 2024, you're like, well, the run game never really materialized the way we hoped it would, and the defense wasn't quite up to the standard that we're used to. So when they go on the road to play Tennessee in week 3, this is going to be something that it's not going to tell the entire tale of the Bulldog season, but you're going to see a lot of who and what they can become on Rocky Top when they go up to play the Volunteers. So that's week 3. Week 4, Alabama. Do I really need to talk about Alabama? We all know what this game means to both fan bases. We all know what it means to Kirby Smart, whether he wants to admit it or not. We all know that for whatever reason, this has been a bit of a bugaboo game for Georgia. The difference here is that Alabama's coming to Athens. Will that make a difference? Will that be one of the things that helps Georgia get over the hump against the Crimson Tide? Because when you look at what Kalen DeBoer is bringing back in Alabama, they're going to have a new quarterback as well. They're going to have to find new playmakers. They're going to have to figure out exactly what they're going to be, both on offensive and defensive sides of the ball, just like Georgia will. So there's a lot of churn at Alabama. Doesn't mean that that's not still Alabama lining up across from Georgia on September 27. But before we get through 4 games in the new year, the Dogs will have played 2 really good-sized SEC opponents. 2 teams that believe that they should be competing for the SEC championship. So we're going to know a lot about Georgia after that first month. That's a pretty good way to kick everything off, if you ask me. Now, As we roll into October, the Kentucky Wildcats are going to come into town, and we have to assume that Kentucky is not going to be somebody that's going to be contending for the SEC in 2025. Now, given the landscape of college football these days, you just never know, right? Transfers, NIL, so on and so forth. But you have to assume that this is going to be a game that's going to be a challenge for Georgia because, well, let's face it, Kentucky is always a physical game for Georgia, whether they play at Kentucky or at Georgia. And at the end of the day, they will be tested, but Georgia should win this game. So in a perfect scenario, obviously the Dogs would be undefeated here. They will be favored in every game that they've played up to this point, but will they be able to execute it? So we're going to have to, this year's a year of change. It's going to be a year of growth, and the Dogs are going to have to figure this all out and show us as the season unfolds. That's just all there is to it. Now, as we move deeper into October, Georgia gets back on the road, and they're going to go play Auburn. Now, Auburn is fancying themselves as an up-and-comer inside the conference. Whether Alabama views them that way, or Tennessee views them that way, or Florida views them that way, or Georgia views them that way, Auburn thinks that they're just a quarterback away, a player here on defense away from being right there in the conversation, beating teams that they maybe shouldn't beat occasionally across the course of their schedule, and potentially moving into contention inside the conference. Now, if you ask me, that's a bridge a little too far. I don't think that's where Auburn's going to be in 2025, but we know that they are working on some things over there. I put Auburn somewhere between Kentucky and Tennessee right now in terms of what they're going to be here in 2025. I would expect that maybe Auburn's going to be a little bit better than Kentucky. Again, this is all way too early, and it's a whole lot of conjecture. But we've still got another round of there's so much that's still moving. But Auburn is always difficult. Auburn at Jordan Hare is always dangerous. So by this point, you got to hope that whoever's playing quarterback for Georgia has found his footing. He's already been on the road once, and they're really settling into that identity that they were looking for earlier in the year. And that should be enough. That and the talent on the roster should be enough to get Georgia past Auburn here with a W. We'll see. Now, of course, last year, Georgia had to go on the road deep into the schedule and play Ole Miss, which turned out to be a loss for Georgia. And there was not a whole lot good about that. There's really nothing you could say that went well for Georgia on that visit to Ole Miss. And Ole Miss is going to be a new-looking team. That's just who they are in this new world of college football. They're going to turn the roster over every year, and they're just going to try to get the right pieces and come together and make a magical run. That's who they appear to be under Lane Kiffin right now. The thing is, they're coming to Athens. So we got to think that they're going to be offensively good, but they all are also breaking in a new quarterback. Now, we saw some of that quarterback last year when the Dogs went on the road. He looks like a playmaker. In fact, he went on social media just this week saying that he predicts they're going to play for a national championship here in 2025. We will see. Big talk from a kid that's never started a game. But he believes in himself, and so be it. Ole Miss is always going to challenge Georgia in this new configuration under Lane Kiffin simply because of what they do offensively. But year over year, and based off of the foundation of the program, I'm always going to look at this game and say, I think Georgia's probably the better program, the better team, and should get the win. Again, the advantage here is that they have to come to Athens, so I'm looking forward to seeing what Georgia can do against Ole Miss right there, but I do expect that they're probably going to be able to get that win. Which moves us along into November, and that's where the cocktail party happens, down in Jacksonville. Well, I'm not sure if this is the year. Yeah, it's in Jacksonville here in 2025. It's in the next couple of years that game's going to move to a different neutral site because they have to do some work on the stadium down there in Jacksonville. But the Gators have a new quarterback. Billy Napier seems to have a new lease on life down there in the swamp. The team is young and talented, and there are whispers out there that this is a team that people think could cause a lot of trouble inside the conference here in 2025 and potentially play their way into consideration for a shot at the SEC championship in Atlanta. I don't know. We'll have to see because The thing about this game, and you know how I feel about Florida, I hate the Gators. This game means more to me than any other on the schedule. Knowing when I look at them this year, I'm thinking that looks like a dangerous team. Now, again, top to bottom, you'd have to think Georgia's going to be the better team here, the better squad on paper. I would expect that Georgia would be favored in this game whenever they play it down in Jacksonville. But you can't look at it and consider it a walkover. I think Georgia's going to be in good shape to win it, but I do think that Lagway makes them dangerous. I do think that he's talented enough to make the other players around him better. And if Georgia is not handling their business and progressing the way we would expect a Kirby Smart team to progress, this one could really be a dangerous spot for Georgia when they head down there to take on the Gators. And I certainly don't want to see that happen. I mean, if there's any game that I don't want to lose, it would be to the Florida Gators. Now, as we skip past that, Mississippi State's up next. They are in a complete rebuild down there in Starkville. And in year two, I'm sure that we will see some improvements, but I just don't think that State's going to have anything for Georgia here. Georgia should get the win. By this point in the year, we are hopefully on a roll, playing our best ball, improving as the season goes along. Because the next week, we have the team that I'm going to talk about here a little bit later, the Texas Longhorns on deck. Now, like I said, this year, they have to come to Athens. That'll be their first trip in between the hedges, as far as I know. And I think they're going to get a good old Georgia welcome. That's what I think is going to happen. A lot of people are going to look at Texas and say, well, Arch Manning's there. He's a preseason Heisman favorite. And Texas is probably a lot of people's preseason number one team. My question would be, with all due respect, why? Texas is no different than Georgia in that they're going to have a new starting quarterback. They're going to have to replace a lot of things in a lot of places. That defense for Texas this last year, they were a good unit, but they're going to be losing a lot of folks off of that group. That offensive line that led the way for that scoring offense this past season, they are also going to have to be replacing a lot of things. That's just the way it is in college football now. So when you look top to bottom, Georgia stacks up with Texas or anybody else across the country in terms of what it is they might be able to accomplish. The difference is the Longhorns have to come between the hedges. So if you're going to look at this far out and give somebody an advantage, I'm going to give it to Georgia there, considering everything else might be equal. Manning might turn out to be a tremendous player for Texas, but you got to go show me. Same with whoever Georgia trots out there at quarterback. So this far out, I think it's going to be a great game. I'm looking forward to it. Slight edge to the Dogs here, simply because it's at home. After that, we're getting down to near the end here. Charlotte is going to come between the hedges, and the Dogs are going to wrap up what is really a good home schedule in 2025. I mean, you get, like I said, I think Marshall's a good game to open the season. You get Alabama at home, Kentucky, Ole Miss at home, and the Longhorns between the hedges, in addition to finishing off with Charlotte. I think this is a good home schedule for Georgia. I think they can make a lot of hay because they have those key games at home. And then the Dogs will finish up against Georgia Tech, not on campus down on the flats, but at the Benz. Now, if Georgia has, to some people's mind, overachieved, this game will be the final game before they get ready to go play in the SEC championship game. Either way, Brent Key and his Yellow Jackets showed us this last year that they're going to fight Georgia now. This is no longer a walkover game for the Dogs. And every time these two teams line it up, it's going to be emotional, it's going to be involved, and it's going to be must-watch television. You can bet your bottom dollar that whatever they did, well, they played on Friday this last year, you can bet that's where this game's probably going to live. I haven't looked ahead on my schedule here to see if the 29th is in fact a Friday, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is, because the kind of numbers that game pulled last year is what is going to determine where this game gets played moving forward. And given that there was so much high drama and the nation's attention was focused on this game in prime time last year, you can bet your bottom dollar that when ABC or ESPN is making the decisions here about where they're going to put this game, it's going to be in a similar window. And it's going to get a lot of eyeballs, which will only amp up everything that's going on on the field, right? The fans will be more into it. The players know it's going to be a primetime game and it's going to get eyeballs. So this one is one that we can all look forward to ending the season with. It's going to be a good one. It's going to be hard fought. And of course, just like Florida, this is a game that you don't want to lose for different reasons. I've said repeatedly that Georgia has really three rivals. It's Florida, Auburn, Georgia Tech. Now, depending on how old you are, that's generally how you're going to shuffle who you think is Georgia's biggest rival. For me, it is absolutely Florida. There's not even a discussion there. But make no mistake, losing to Georgia Tech absolutely sucks. It's like taking the worst medicine you've ever had in your life. I'm old enough to remember when my grandma would offer me a tablespoonful of castor oil for anything that bothered you. That's the most putrid experience I ever had in my childhood. I have to say that losing to Georgia Tech, and I've seen it happen, that's about the same. So let's make sure that doesn't happen, dogs. Can we just do that? Can we just get those taken care of? Florida, Auburn, Georgia Tech. Then we don't have to worry about everything else. We'll figure them out one at a time. So that's our walk through the schedule. A few observations. Again, not a pick 'em, not a prediction, nothing like that. I haven't even considered breaking down these games in terms of who might have the advantage or so on. But just a few observations, things to look for as we look ahead to the 2025 schedule. So let's go ahead and jump into a few freshmen that we might see have to play for Georgia in 2025. Now, I just want to remind you that over the last few seasons, Kirby Smart has made it a point to let everybody know just how young his team is. But see, here's the secret. Kirby and Georgia are not the only teams that have to deal with this every year. All right? The way NIL is working these days, people are going to be moving all over the place. The transfer portal allows people to transfer as often as they want to right now. And when you do that, you're going to be young. Pair that with the recent history of freshmen coming in to universities at mid-year, getting an accelerated pattern of getting ready to play. So they have a spring, an entire offseason, and then a fall camp with a team. You have to count on those freshmen to play earlier. So the system was going to push us in this direction anyway. Now what you have happening is when you are a top program like Georgia or Alabama or Ohio State or, pick one right there who's perennially in the top 5, you have players that decide to go to the NFL. And when they do that, it's not your freshman, sophomore classes that get beat up. It's not your senior class that gets beat up because they're going to be done anyway. Where it hurts you is in that junior class. Because you have, just look at what Georgia did this year. Players like Jalen Walker, and he was one of 8 that declared as underclassmen or players that had another year of eligibility remaining to go to the NFL draft. So that leaves a gaping hole right there in the middle of your program. So in Georgia's case, this year, they have no returning seniors. They graduated everybody that ran out of eligibility, and the players that had eligibility remaining, they decided that they were going to go to the draft or transfer out. So Georgia's coming into 2025 with no seniors on the team. They still have plenty of juniors, right? Or rising juniors, I should say. We have to refer to them that way. Rising juniors, because all of Georgia's rising seniors went to the draft, right? So you have the rising juniors that are going to be there, that are going to have to play, that are going to be depended on to be real playmakers, difference makers for this team. Then you have the group of sophomores, and then you have your true freshmen. As Kirby has been fond to point out lately, more than 50% of Georgia's roster over the last handful of years have been sophomores or freshmen, and that number is only going higher. So when you think that recruiting doesn't matter because players are going to go anywhere they want to go at the drop of a hat, that's true. They can, and I'm sure they will. Recruiting still matters because you have to be able to go out and get players that can be quickly developed and get them into the rotation and that are going to contribute to your team. Does that mean that everybody's going to be a starter right out of high school? No, physically, that's not the norm. That's not what's going to happen across the country. But you have to get the best players available that are coming into you, into your program, so that you can put them in the best position possible to contribute as early as possible. So with that thought process in mind, there are a few for Georgia that they're really going to look at playing this year. They're going to need them to be players. One of those is Elijah Griffin. Now, Elijah Griffin is considered to be the top player that is not a quarterback in the country in this past recruiting class. And it's one of those deals where he's big enough right now to contribute. He's still not a full-grown man, if you will, right? He's not the size he's going to be after a little time in the weight room and a little time in the nutrition program at the University of Georgia. But he's large enough to be a contributor right now. He's also talented enough to get on the field, and he's playing in a position where Georgia is going to have to replace a lot of bodies. They are going to depend on these young players. And when you've got a player that is considered to be as talented as Elijah Griffin, then you have to think he is going to have an opportunity to play. Remember what I said about those early games where you have Marshall and Austin Peay? If Elijah Griffin is the kind of player that we all hope he is, that the coaches all believe he is, then he's going to be on the field in those first two games. He's going to be getting his feet wet. Hopefully, he's not going to be in a position where he has to be a day one starter for Georgia. But he could be that good. The thing is, we don't know. Because Georgia played a lot of those dudes last year along the defensive line that were older. They were veterans. And a lot of those young dudes didn't get a lot of snaps. So we don't really know what they are. We know they have bodies, but we don't know who and what they are. The one player that we thought we knew something about, Jamal Jarrett, decided to transfer out. So now you have a situation where there are going to be a lot of new faces on that defensive line. And if Elijah Griffin is as good as we all believe he is, he could absolutely be that guy. He could step in there, earn his spot, and just become a playmaker for Georgia. He has that capability. Not every freshman in this class has that level of capability, but he's one that does. Another one that could very well make an immediate impact in Athens is Talon Taylor. Georgia, believe it or not, actually recruited a 5-star wide receiver to come play football for them. So the question becomes, given what we saw from the wide receiver position in 2024 and the fact that we lost a lot of players out of that room, they need playmakers. Taylor seems to be one of those guys. Are the Georgia coaching staff going to get him in there and let him play early? Does he have the ability to make an impact as a true freshman like A.J. Green or perhaps George Pickens? I don't know. I know he's long, athletic. I know he's really smooth with the balls in the air. He has the potential. That's why he was a 5-star guy. But as we all know at Georgia, there's a lot that goes into you getting on the field. It will be very interesting to see how the coaching staff chooses to use Talon Taylor, knowing that they need playmakers at that position. But he's not alone. There's another kid there, C.J. Wiley, from right here in the state of Georgia, that could be a difference maker at wide receiver. Now, Wiley officially signed on as a 4-star player, but there were a lot of people who assumed that he might crack that 5-star ranking. Again, stars don't matter. They have to go, do it on the field. But the thing about a player like Wiley is he is super smooth when the ball's in the air. Really good hands, a good catcher of the football. And if Georgia needs anything, that's what they need, is a guy that when the ball hits him in the hands, it's going to be more like Velcro than it is going to be bricks, right? And I'm not throwing shade at anybody, just a reality. Georgia dropped more footballs last year than any team in the country. So when you bring in guys like Taylor and C.J. Wiley, you need them to be able to step in and play. Now, I'm not forgetting about the other dudes that are coming back. Dylan Bell. I know Nitro's out there. I know Sokovie White's out there. There are others. But I'm saying there's an opportunity here for these young men to show that they deserve to see the football. So we will see if they can actually get that done. Speaking of pass catchers and an automatic mismatch, the minute he showed up on campus, you have Elias Williams, the best tight end in the country in 2024. The kid towers at 6'7", 6'8", and he's well over 200 pounds. Not only is he considered a tight end, but you are going to see him flexed out in the slot at Georgia. You might even see him line up at wide receiver out on the edge at Georgia. Why? Because of the mismatch he presents. If you need a guy to catch the football on a high point jump ball in the end zone, if he can at all get the job done, I'm rolling Williams out there to do that. You need a guy to maybe block a kick as a leaper behind the line on field goal block or extra point block. This is a guy that could see the field soon. This is the kind of talent that Kirby Smart recruits every year. The difference is, and I say difference because I feel like their hands are going to be forced a little bit. Will we see these men get more run early in the year? And will Georgia and their offense, as they figure out who and what they want to be, trust them enough to put the ball in their hands early? Kirby says repeatedly, if you are good enough, you are old enough. More than any other year in recent memory, this is going to be the year, I think, where we see that borne out one way or the other, because they're going to have players play. They're so young, and the opportunity for players to make a name for themselves is so great that every person I've mentioned to you so far is going to have a chance to play. So if you're good enough and that makes you old enough, then it falls on Kirby Smart and Mike Bobo and Glenn Schumann to take these young freshmen, put them on the field, coach them up, and get them ready to go. Let them go play. That's why you recruited them. This is not Georgia 2021, where you've got an entire defense full of players that are going to be drafted and are playing in the NFL today. You don't have that kind of depth right now. All of that's what's going to be sorted out between now and September for Georgia. That's why you go get these guys, coach them up, let them go play. The opportunity is there. If you're not going to do that, it seems to me that it's going to be hard to pitch the next recruit that you can play early at Georgia. We know that you can play early. Look at KJ Bolden. Pair that kind of talent with a Georgia team coming into 2025 that is going to be young and the door is wide open for opportunity to come in and play. I think we're going to see a lot of these young guys play a lot more than maybe we are used to as Georgia Bulldog fans. And this is going to put the onus right back on Kirby and the rest of the coaching staff to make sure that they are developed and ready to go. This is one of the most important off seasons that Georgia has faced in recent memory. Every offseason is big, but the bottom line is, since they got back from whipping TCU a couple years ago, things in the offseason at the University of Georgia have not gone smoothly, and that has to get cleaned up. This has to be an offseason where we don't have those reports seemingly continuously of players getting into trouble or not doing the right thing. That's not what this can be. This has to be a year where, as a program collectively, they put their heads down, keep their noses clean, get to work, and be about the business of football. That's what this team's going to require if Georgia is going to do anything like we hope they can do in 2025. Now, I've talked a lot about the offensive side of the ball, but I'm going to start with defense and I'm going to finish with defense because there's another guy, Isaiah Gibson, speaking about positions of need. Isaiah Gibson walks into Georgia as a guy who already is big enough and ready to go, much like Michael Williams, who can step up and fill a role and be productive for Georgia in 2025. They need edge players. Now, the thing about Gibson, and I never got to see the young man play in person, so take this for what it is, but if there was a knock about Gibson, it was that he was so much better than everybody he was playing against that he played when he wanted to, right? He didn't turn it on all the time. He's not a guy who has that big motor that's just going to get after it every play because that's who he is, like, say, a Nolan Smith. He's very talented, but he doesn't have that part under control yet. That's where this coaching and development comes in. At a position like defensive end, a position of real need for Georgia, they are going to have to get Isaiah Gibson to flip that switch and be ready to go all the time if he's going to do anything near what he's capable of here in 2025. That's on the coaches. Now, the young man has to mature. He has to grow up. He has to understand what his opportunity is here. But the coaches are going to have to be on him to push him to be the best he can be. Hopefully, players like he, as well as any of the wide receivers, and Elijah Griffin get that message sooner rather than later, because if they do, they have a real opportunity to really do some big things here for the Dogs in 2025. So I got Isaiah Gibson is another one that I'm really going to be looking at as somebody who might be able to make a big impact on the field, not just in the recruiting headlines for the University of Georgia. So we've talked about Dogs' final ranking. We've talked about early schedule observations. We looked at some guys that could be impact players for the Dogs. There's only one thing left to do, and that's to pull the focus back a little bit and take a look at a way too early top 5 heading into 2025. I know. I want to laugh myself because it seems kind of ludicrous to try to do this, because all we can really base it off of is what we saw in 2024, what we think we know about these teams moving into 2025, and what we can sort of configure in our brains in terms of how this thing's going to shake out. And remember, this is not like I'm telling you who's going to win the national championship, or I'm not making any final predictions on conference championships or anything like that. I'm just giving you what I think the lay of the land is going to be as we move into the season. And remember, why do we have preseason rankings in the first place? It's to get everybody jazzed up about the upcoming season. So you want it to be a little bit controversial and all that sort of stuff. Now, I'm not speaking for myself. I'm just speaking in terms of the rankings in general. So when those start to pop up and we get closer to the season and you see so-and-so ranked here or there or wherever, just keep that in the back of your mind, because it's about ginning up enthusiasm for the game. So with all that said, here is my extremely too early preseason top 5 for 2025. To begin with, I'm going to start with those Texas Longhorns. Why not? They're in the SEC. I know it's only going to inflate their heads bigger than they already are. They have a big name player coming to take over at quarterback for them this year. Sarkisian just got a new pay raise out there. Everybody's going to be talking about the Texas Longhorns heading into the year. Why not go ahead and put them at number 1 in my preseason top 5? That's where we're going to start. Number 2 will be the reigning national champions, the Ohio State Buckeyes. When you look across the country, and I've mentioned this earlier, Georgia, Texas, Ohio State, all of these teams, Oregon, are all going to be replacing quarterbacks. So none of this stuff happens in a vacuum. It's not so much what any one team is about. It's about what is everybody else dealing with also, and who do I think might have the best sort of mix of things heading into the season. So Texas at 1, Ohio State at 2. They have to replace most of their defense, if not all of it. I mean, Caleb Downs comes back. There might be a corner that comes back. But for the most part, Ohio State, they're going to have to rebuild that unit. Offensively, they're going to have a new quarterback. They have a wonderkind in Jeremiah Smith out at wide receiver, so maybe that'll cover up a lot of warts. But they've got some stuff to figure out too. But showing due respect, giving credit where it's due, I'm going to put Ohio State at number 2 in my preseason top 5. Now, number 3, this is the one that I wrestled with the most, because I have a real issue with Penn State on the whole. I understand they're bringing back their quarterback, both of their NFL caliber running backs. I understand that defensively, they're still going to be pretty good, but they are losing pieces off of that defense. I was never really blown away with Drew Aller at quarterback, and we all know that they need help at wide receiver because they didn't throw the ball to them in their college football playoff game, believe it or not. Like, how do you not throw the ball out to your wide receiver if you're trying to win the game? So whatever that's worth. And then the cherry on top of that is James Franklin still hasn't won a big game when it matters. And until they sort out all of these issues, there's no way I could put them higher than number 3, and I really wrestled with doing that. They seem to be bringing back the most in that they're returning their starting quarterback and the center part of their offense, but I just couldn't put them any higher than number 3. And I had a hard time with that just because James Franklin is their head coach. But you got to put them somewhere, I think, because of what they did. And when you look at their schedule, it doesn't look like there's a lot of losses on that schedule in 2025. So Going into the year, I'm going to go with Penn State at number 3. I'm going to put Georgia at 4. Now, I have seen people who have the Dogs as high as number 2, and I think a lot of that's probably based off of top to bottom roster and stuff like that. And the fact that, yes, they're replacing their quarterback, but the guy that everybody thinks is going to win the quarterback position, he's already played in about as big a situation as you can play in, and he's done it twice. And he's shown up pretty good. And if he'd gotten a little bit of help, he might have looked even better. So I understand that, and that's why they have Georgia at 2. But given the things I've already laid out for you, I'm just going to slot them in at 4. No disrespect there. Again, this is all for fun anyway. I think Georgia's going to be a top 5 team. I'm going to put them in at number 4 heading into the 2025 season. And number 5. Now, there are a handful of teams that I considered putting here, but I'm going to go with Notre Dame. And I'm going to do that because of 2 things. One, I'm going to give Marcus Freeman his flowers right now. And I'm going to tell you that, is he the best coach in college football? I don't think so. Is he a very good head coach on the up in college football? Yes, I believe he is. And he's doing things at Notre Dame that we haven't seen done at Notre Dame. In that, when I watched this Notre Dame play Georgia this year, they look different. They, in my opinion, were not on the same level as Georgia, top to bottom, roster, athletic, that sort of gauge. But they were more athletic than I have seen any Notre Dame team be in recent memory. That means that Freeman is recruiting a different kind of player, and those players are listening to him and taking a chance on Notre Dame. So I think they look different. I think they have good leadership. And I think that, yes, they have to replace their quarterback too. Yes, they have to figure out how they're going to be more explosive on offense in the pass game. But that's what the offseason is for. Georgia has to do the same thing. So if we're starting from 0, I'm going to put Notre Dame at number 5. So there it is, my way too early preseason top 5 for 2025. And I'm sure we'll redo this once or twice between now and when we actually kick the thing off. But let's run through it again. I have Notre Dame at number 5, Georgia at 4, Penn State at 3, Ohio State at 2, and the Texas Longhorns are who I'm going to put at the preseason number 1 spot heading into 2025. So looking ahead to 2025, there is a lot of change that's going to happen in Athens. But I think that the Dogs are as well positioned as anyone else when I look across the country to have a good season in this upcoming football season. I think that Georgia is going to be right there. They're going to have every opportunity to win the games that they obviously should win, as well as the ones that maybe there would be some question about because of the way the schedule falls. I think that if the Dogs get the kind of impact from their freshman class that I think they could get, that I think they are positioned to get, then we are going to be pleasantly surprised with how this season turns out with those young players here in 2025. We even took a second to take a look at what was going to happen across the country. It's way too early to know what's going to happen, but it sure is a lot of fun to talk about it. It's always a lot of fun to be here with you guys, and I appreciate you for sitting in with me. Until next time, y'all take care of yourselves, take care of your friends, take care of your families, take care of each other, and go Dogs!
Told them, how about them fucking dogs? That's what I told them.